there's a concept. When I was trying to get into venture, I interviewed at a bunch of firms. The two most well-known that rejected me was Sequoia and Excel. And Excel had these two senior partners, Arthur Patterson and Jim Swartz. And Arthur Patterson had invented a model of thinking inside of Excel that he called the prepared mind, which is if you think that there is something interesting, you have a responsibility to give a shit about it enough where you learn and you put in hours that nobody else is going to pay you back for. And that's a very simple test, because otherwise what you're doing is you're just checking boxes, trying to get societal validation for getting a job at company A versus company B. Versus if you actually put your head down and want to learn about something, nobody is there to tell you that that's a good idea, because it complicates your life with your partner, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your friends. It takes away from going out and getting drunk. You have to make this trade-off. And then it turns out very few people do. So if you want to really figure it out, I'll give you two big trails of breadcrumbs that you should follow. And I've said this now a little bit redundantly, but I'll just keep saying it because it is the most important thing in the next 25 years. So I don't care what you like or don't like. You need to pivot your career to one of these two things if you want to be successful. Number one is that the marginal cost of energy generation is going to zero. Okay? You have wars, you have death, you have all kinds of geopolitics that pivot around natural resources and energy. What happens to a peace dividend in the world when you don't have to fight for that stuff because you have abundant energy? And the cost of making that energy is effectively zero, and it has no impact into the ecology of the world. Well, we're about to find that out. And when you take the cost of energy to zero, now it unlocks all kinds of other problems that before were impossible to tackle because it would be too expensive. So that's trend number one. Trend number two is that we have shifted the ability to calculate and solve any computational problem away from a CPU to these things called GPUs and ASICs and FPGAs. That's all fancy language for things are getting easier and easier to solve. Okay, there's a company in Silicon Valley called OpenAI. You may have played with their tools called Wall-E or GPT-3, or DALL-E, sorry, and GPT-3. What are these things? These things are massive leaps in AI. Okay, these are models where you can type in something like, and one of you guys should do it now. We can throw it up here, like, Wharton class of geniuses in the Renaissance style. Those are just words, and they'll translate it into an image. It's incredible, incredible technology. Okay, or GPT-3, where you can have a language model now where it can auto-write a book, and you will not know that it was not a human. That problem took $1 billion to solve. Microsoft gave OpenAI $1 billion. OpenAI turned around and gave $750 million of that right back to Microsoft to buy credits on Azure because it needed so much power and so much compute to solve that problem. Today, that problem will cost you $1 million to solve. Tomorrow, that problem will cost you $10,000 to solve. So the point is that we have removed power constraints and computing constraints. So think of some examples of these things. So for example, in life sciences today, you can go and now you don't need a scientist. So you don't need in vivo and in vitro speculation of drugs and molecules. You can just use a computer to simulate that. You can basically figure out the entire bounded space of 10 to the 33 molecules. One of you could figure out a solution to a rare disease. That's a $10 to $20 billion payoff per rare disease. It's worth your time. Partner up with somebody in the CS department and go figure out how to tackle that problem. Before it would cost you millions of dollars in power and compute. Today it costs you nothing. And then guys like us will basically feed that engine. We'll pay you to go and solve those things. On the energy side, there's going to be all of this stuff that happens when basically everybody has a little nuclear fusion reactor on their roof, which, by the way, is not an actual reactor. It's just a solar panel that collects energy from the true nuclear reactor in the sky, which is the sun. And you store it in your wall, and now you can do whatever you want, right? Do you see any country trudging into any other country to fight over oil when you have zero-cost energy? Just think about it. No. So you're going to rip apart and turn over trillions and trillions of dollars of the world economy. Your job is to get close enough to it to just grab a few of those shekels for yourself, put it in your pocket, and you won. But people overcomplicate the problem. But that's the answer.
So is changing the world that motion of acquiring the capital? Or
Changing the world is not what you do. Changing the world is an outcome after you have enough resources to vote in enough volume so that some people say, your view makes sense and is allowed in the world. That's just a natural way in which things happen today. And that's why I think it's very important to operate and embrace capitalism, both because you can accumulate resources and you can direct those resources basically as a voter, and the more resources you have, the more votes you get. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having winners and losers. There's nothing wrong with having a distribution of outcomes. All of those things are healthy to move the world forward.
Makes sense.
But we've lost that script, I think, a little bit. So I started to learn about climate change and energy transition 3 years ago. Now, I'll give you my answer today because I'm in a different position, okay? But then I'll give you the answer for you. Okay. My answer is there's a team at McKinsey that does these things called teach-ins for guys like me, Gates, others. Whenever we have an idea, we call this guy. And this is a senior partner at McKinsey. And he basically, and all these experts show up and we spend weeks and hours and months. And we kind of know anything about anything. We can learn. So I called them and I said, I would really like to learn climate change. And I spent an entire summer basically doing these deep dive teach-ins, and then slowly iterated, probably for like the next 6 or 8 months, meeting experts. They facilitated the whole thing. This cost me several $1 million, but it's a service that is, for me, very worthwhile. And then I do what Druck says, which is you got to rip some money in so that you start to really pay attention. So I took $300 or $400 million, and I said I'm going to make a bunch of bets. So I have this empirical kind of theoretical knowledge, and then I have the on-the-ground. Did I just get punched in the face with this investment, or is it working? Why? What is it? How much of that is me? How much of this is just market beta? Blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of that process, which takes about 3 or 4 years, I start to develop a little bit of mastery. I feel like I'm coming out of that learning curve now in energy, where I kind of have a decent sense, an early good sense of where the bodies are buried. And so this is why I'm very curious now about I feel like now I know enough to avoid some mistakes, whereas before, you get through that first part where you think, oh, this is it, I've learned it. And it tends to be wrong. When I was younger, how I would do this thing is entirely on my own using Wikipedia and YouTube. And it is unbelievable how much information you can get. But it requires these lonely nights and moments where you've had this sensation where you have no friends. And it doesn't matter. And that's a big challenge.
Okay, so would you say like the fastest way to get any mastery?
There is no fast way.
Okay.
Learn and then make bets. That is the way. That process will catalyze your understanding of something